And we're live.
Yep.
Welcome to A Nice Place to Brew. I'm Jason.
And I'm George.
Happy Thursday, everybody. Hope everything's going well. Today is July 30th. We do our webcast here every Thursday at 6 p.m. Central Time, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Our can see the weekly webcast on our YouTube page and now live on Facebook as well. Our YouTube page has all of our past episodes. We've been doing weekly shows since the beginning of the quarantine, so there's quite a bit of material out there. So please check it out when you have a chance. Our website is www.aniceplacetobrew.com. Our social media links are on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Nice Place to Brew and A Nice Place to Brew. And we have a podcast under the same name, A Nice Place to Brew, that's available on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, and everywhere you get your podcast from. Welcome to the broadcast, Mr. Pauly.
What's going on, Jason? How you doing?
Good, man. Happy Thursday. You are okay. Hashtag Where's Pauly?
Right? Yeah, with his
Pauly's
increasingly majestic
right
beard.
now, on his way to Route 66 Old School Brewing.
Route 66 Old School Brewing. In what city?
Wilmington, Illinois.
Oh,
yeah, I was
Bloomington.
doing community service doing some community service for some stuff that I got in trouble for last year.
Okay.
And my friend / new roommate lives here right now, so we're hanging out and we're heading up to the brewery. And I figured, what better way to do this chime in than being at a brewery?
I think that's fantastic. This would be Bloomington, Illinois' first appearance on A Nice Place to Brew in any form.
No, not Bloomington. Wilmington with a W.
Oh, did I mishear that? Somebody say Bloomington? Okay, all right.
No, I said Bloomington because that's definitely what I heard.
Okay, all right. Wilmington. Okay.
I was distracted by the increasingly majestic beard.
It's pretty epic. Yeah, Pauly, your beard is amazing. I'm jealous.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm combing it out now. I'm putting conditioner and shit in there. So, really quick before we get going, Jason or George, you guys see Scott on there?
Yes.
Well, Jason would be the one. Is he in there?
Is he in? No, he's not in the window. No, we got his email.
Okay.
Was he on the invite?
He was.
He
I
was.
put him on the invite.
I did see him on the invite. No, he just messaged me.
Oh, okay.
He just messaged me like 2 seconds ago saying he's trying to get in.
Okay.
So keep an eye out for him.
Okay, we will. How far are you outside the brewery? Are you walking right up to it?
Yeah, I'm probably about a football field away.
Okay.
And then I get hooked up to their Wi-Fi, and then I could probably see you guys. I can hear you guys, but I can't see you guys.
Yeah.
Okay.
But you guys are ugly enough anyway. I know what you look like, so don't worry about that.
Yeah, exactly. No. You know what you're missing.
But I got a fresh new haircut, so
yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, you got that fresh new haircut. Then you're looking cute there, George.
Oh, I'm adorable.
So, my soon-to-be roommate's getting a taste of what she's going to be dealing with every Thursday night now.
Yeah.
So
fun time.
We might be getting cameos from Cassie every now and then.
That's awesome.
Here, meet her. Say hi.
Hi.
Cheers,
Cassie.
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 Actually, it's kind of cool because this little place, Jason, you would like this because this little place in Wilmington here with a W, there's a winery and a brewery in the same building.
Really?
Yeah, it's like a storefront. There's like 4 or 5 storefronts in here. There's like 4 or 5 storefronts, but there's a winery, and then a store, a brewery, and then on the other side of the building there's a little takeout food place.
Nice.
Yeah,
I'm trying to think. I feel like the only brewery / winery that I've been to is that Round Barn up in Michigan that we went to, George.
Oh yeah. Well, next time you're out, I'll have to take you to Old House. That's a brewery, winery, distillery. So it's triple.
They got all 3 covered, huh?
Yeah.
Interesting. All right, well, guys, give me a couple seconds. I'm gonna walk in. I'm gonna get myself a beer, and I'll be right back with you.
Got it.
Okay, sounds good, Paulie. So, Jason, we skipped over our regular stuff. What are you drinking tonight?
Hold on a second.
Okay.
Back. Okay. Going back to an old favorite. Hop Slam.
Hop Slam.
So
All
I
right.
bought a 12 pack of this several months ago. I think it was right when the quarantine got started, and I'm kicking my last can. And I got to ask Paulie about this because I think that Hop Slam is a limited, well, I mean, maybe not limited release, but I think it's a seasonal release.
Oh.
So I hope that's not the case because I enjoyed the hell out of this and I look forward to buying more. So, anyways, Hop Slam is a double IPA. It comes in at 10% ABV and it is hopped with an exceptionally aromatic blend of hops. That's as specific as they get. They did, yeah. Okay. I'm not seeing that they map out what the actual hop combination is. That's fine. It's made by Bell's, obviously one of the more respected breweries in the Midwest. So, yes, I'm a fan. What about you, George?
So I keep looking over to my what you see, I think, as my left or maybe my right. My right? I'm not sure. Anyway, I keep looking over here because I'm looking at my computer, trying to figure out exactly what I'm drinking. I think because it's a bit of a mystery bottle, I was testing my Shandy, which is now carbonated, and I had some, and it's turned out pretty well. And I found this, latch chop bomber bottle, and I was like, "What are you?" So I decided to pour it, but I'm looking through my recipes, and I think it's a saison recipe that I made a while back.
So that's been in the bottle for quite some time, then, hasn't it?
Yes, it has. Yeah. Yes, and it's held up. I'm getting kind of a it's probably been in the bottle for between 4 and 6 months, and I'm getting like a little bit of I want to call it a little bit of like a mint character, which is strange because there's no mint involved. But other than that, it's still clear as a bell, and you got good carbonation and still has some pretty good notes in it. If I remember correctly, the saison recipe that I put together, that's right, I put black pepper, ginger root, and orange peel in it. So honestly, some of that might be where I'm getting those notes from. Yeah.
Was it one of the warmer yeasts? Did you ferment it hot? Yeah. Okay.
Warm. Yes.
Okay. Did you keep the bottle at room temperature, or was it in a fridge?
It was in my chest freezer. My
okay, so you kept it refrigerated. Okay. Either way, yeah, I would think that that beer would hold up nicely, as long as it's kept at its table temperature. Yeah, I get a little concerned about those latch top bottles about like holding a beverage for a really long time.
I mean, look at the carbonation as I pour that. I mean, it is and when I popped it open, I got a significant pop out of it. So as far as like anything getting into it, I don't think anything did. I think it's, I really like the latch top bottles. I especially like them for like going to bottle shares and things and sharing them around.
Which is all short term. So no, I agree completely with that. Those are ideal for like little get-togethers like that, especially fill it up earlier on in the day, in the evening, pop it open, share it with your friends, go home with an empty bottle, you're done.
Right.
It's a different animal if you're keeping it in any environment, for multiple weeks.
Yeah, no, I get that. Yeah. So I've not had any issues with them, but I get the reservation. So yeah.
Well, hey, if it works, it works. Keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah. So before these guys get back here, I did hear something that was a bit concerning, and I was wondering, as someone that works in the packaging industry, if you might be able to weigh in on it.
Okay.
That apparently there is a looming can shortage for 12 and 16 ounce cans out there in the world.
That's not really a new thing, but yes, it's become more pronounced since.
Yeah, that's what I've been hearing, is that it's like, ramping up and stuff. So
yeah, you'd be surprised at just how few companies here in the United States manufacture aluminum cans.
Right.
It's less than 10.
So is it like trade negotiations with China issues? Or
no,
like what's,
no, we don't.
Okay.
At least in the way we do business, we do not order any cans internationally. Well, with the one exception being there's one manufacturer in Mexico that we do business with, but nothing outside of North America. I would be concerned about how well cans would hold up on a ship if you were to buy those from China.
Okay, so fair enough. So if that's the case, then what's kind of causing the shortage? Are they not able to produce them because people aren't able to be in the factories? Or
no, just there's so much demand out there in the market. If you think about 4 years ago, the entire market was in glass. Over the last 4 years, the entire glass beer market has all made its way to aluminum. Well, supply, so demand just far surpassed the rate that manufacturers could keep up with it.
So maybe instead of opening up a craft brewery, we open up a craft cannery.
Honestly, like you joke about that, but honestly, I really do feel like there's a big business opportunity out there for anybody who has enough money to invest in machinery to make aluminum cans. Because, and it's more than just beer now. If you walk through a liquor department, you'll see that even wine is making its way into aluminum. Well, that demand for those cans is going to those same less than 10 companies that are making beer cans. So it's significant. Yeah. So it's a good problem to have if you're a can producer, but you do end up having to break a lot of people's hearts saying, hey, listen, I don't have the capacity for it.
So do you think, what do you think is going to be because people aren't going to stop selling beer because they can't get cans. So, do you think we're going to see a resurgence of glass in the market, or?
It would not surprise me. It really would not.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
It is very interesting. We'll see. We'll see. Glass is more expensive, and glass breaks. And when glass breaks, it's not a good thing. So
true.
So
I'm picturing breweries doing like the old home brewer thing of like soaking bottles in PBW to strip off the label.
Yeah, right.
Be like, well, we need bottles. Yeah.
All right, Scott's here. Ready?
Okay. Yep.
All right.
Hey guys.
Hey, Scott.
Welcome, Scott.
What's new?
It's going. How are you this evening?
I'm good. It took me a minute to get connected. I've not used Google Meet before, and my iPad didn't like it. But,
okay. Good.
I'm in now.
Okay, good.
Well, you came in just in time. George and I, we got through our introductions. Paulie made a quick appearance. He had to close his phone, but he should be back momentarily.
Okay.
We do our webcast here every Thursday. We have since the quarantine, and this webcast was really born out of the quarantine as well. We wanted to kind of give both home brewers and professional brewers just kind of an avenue to talk about things that they're working on and how things they've learned along the way, and just general just kind of conversation topics around craft beer and home brewing. So that being the case, can you give a little intro for those listening?
Sure. So you were breaking up a little bit, but you want me to just do like a quick bio or something? That we
Yeah.
did?
Yeah. Who are you?
Okay. So my name's Scott Poynton. I'm a home brewer. I live in the southwest suburbs of Chicago area. I brewed my first batch of beer in the summer of 2009. So I've been doing this over 10 years. And so let's see, actually the story I always tell is that I'm a library director, a public library director.
Oh.
And yeah, my IT guy that works at my library was a home brewer way back in the day, like early 90s. And his name's Mike. And he was a home brewer and then turned pro and worked his way up to the point where he was the assistant brewer at Flossmoor Station Brewing back in the day when they were winning GABF medals and that kind of stuff. And then he decided one day that maybe it wasn't the rock star lifestyle he thought it was going to be, and really it's more of a blue collar production job.
It is.
So
That's
he went back to school and became an IT guy. So then fast forward to 2006, and I was aware that people could make their own beer, but I knew nothing about it. And so I started working at this library where there's this guy who's in the lunchroom every day who has like a world of brewing knowledge. And over the course of like a year or two, I just soaked up a lot of that from him and a lot of the passion. And of course, I liked beer. I like to drink beer. And so back in the George W. Bush days, when they did a stimulus thing for the economy, I took my stimulus check and went out and bought brewing equipment with it. And started brewing in 2009. And I always tell people that, the first two things I did were I knew a guy that, was very knowledgeable. And then I joined a homebrew club that's full of guys and women that are very knowledgeable. So I stood on all their shoulders, so I was able to quickly kind of overcome the newbie hurdles. And by 2011, I had discovered that there was this thing called the Midwest Homebrewer of the Year. Are you guys familiar with that competition?
We are.
Yeah, so
absolutely.
Kind of unbeknownst to me, like just by entering some local competitions, I was sort of entering that. And so in 2010, I kind of perked up and went, hey, look at that. I'm like number 28th in the list. Like, that's cool. And then in 2011, I made a little bit more of a concerted effort at going after it. And I think I came in like, I don't know, 6th or something. And just jokingly that late December, I was telling the family, I'm like, hey, look at this. I came in 6th. And my stepdaughter jokingly said, well, like next year, don't let mom hold you back. so we that's kind of a family joke. So in 2012, I really went after it. Like I structured all my brewing, my home brewing, and all my schedule of brewing and everything around the competitions that I was familiar with. And I ended up winning. I won Home Brewer of the Year, Midwest Home Brewer of the Year in 2012. So that was super fun. And honestly, I mean, just to add sort of like a note of ridiculousness to that story. Early on in 2012, one of the competitions I entered an English dark mild ale, and it ended up winning best of show. And I kind of think because right around that time was when there was sort of like the pendulum was swinging back from everything needed to be, 12% ABV and barrel aged or 100 IBUs. Like the pendulum was swinging back towards session beers, but it hadn't quite done it yet. And so me entering what I hope was a well-made, 3.8% ABV beer, it was like a novelty, and I think it was like the little beer that could. Anyways, it won best of show in this competition, the Babel competition in the north suburbs of Chicago. And then my prize was that the Ram Brewery near there was going to take my recipe and scale it up, and I got to come brew it with them. And then they would enter it as a GABF Pro-Am beer, and damned if it didn't take the silver medal, in the Pro-Am competition. So that was
wow.
That was a hell of a year. Yeah, that was a hell of a year.
Yeah, it is a hell of a year.
Right.
So you said it. I'm sorry. The GABF you said was a saison.
No, it was an English dark mild ale.
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry. The English dark mild. Yes. So What about the Midwest homebrewers? What style did you take that one with? Do you remember?
Well, so that is like a year long. The way it works is all the medals that you win in competitions, you're only allowed to score points once in a certain style category. So if you enter
Right.
like if I entered a porter and it got a third place medal, third place ribbon, whatever, in a competition, then I would get 2 points out of that. But if I entered it again the next month in a different competition and it took first, you'd blow away the 2 points it earned the first time, and then it would earn 8 points because it took a first place.
Right.
But once you've gotten a first place, medal in a category and all the beers that fall within that category, you're kind of done with that category. You can't get any more points then. So that's how you get your points. But then your score in that competition was your kind of gross points multiplied times your winning percentage. So if you just start shotgunning out like 10 beers at every competition and you only win one medal, you're still going to win a lot of medals, but your winning percentage is only like 10%. So
Right.
So the key that year for me was to keep it really tight. You have to their rules say you have to enter at least 4 competitions throughout the year. You have to enter at least 10 different categories, and then everything else I just said. So my attack on that was I'm going to enter as few beers and as few styles as I can, but just do those really well. And so I think I only entered like, I don't know, like probably in the 20s of beers in competitions that year. But I just, I was getting, gold medals and silver medals in almost all of them. And I was keeping my winning percentage. I think my winning percentage was like 66%. I was like 2/3. So my net points were, I don't know, let's say 50 points. And then 2/3 of that was 30 something points. And it was good enough to win. So that was.
There you go. Yeah, I might be confusing it with something else, but I could have swore there was like a final competition, if you will, where you submit something to that organization. But I might be, like I said, I might be confusing that with something else. So
yeah, I think I know what you're talking about, and the name of it's escaping me right now. It's
yeah,
like the Amateur Brewers Masters of Amateur Brewing or something like that.
something like that. Yeah, I don't remember what it is, but yeah, now that you mentioned about that, you're right. It is, and it's kind of a nifty structure that they have, to make sure that not only do you have to brew solid beers, but you have to brew consistently solid beers to make sure you're not just, like you said, shotgunning it out there and throwing 100 beers in every competition and winning that way. So I like that.
Yeah, the other thing I really liked about the structure of it was they force you to at least have entered 10 different style categories. So, I know guys that, are really into IPAs and all they ever brew is IPA after IPA after IPA, and they're great at it. But, they would never win this competition because, sure, take your gold medal in a competition for an IPA, but then now you got to find 9 other categories to brew in. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Double IPA, New England IPA.
Right. No, because those are under one category umbrella.
They are, yeah. No, I'm just joking around.
Yeah. Right. I hear you. So, yeah. So when you say like what beers that I enter in the Midwest homebrewers thing, I mean, my wife's English by birth, and honestly, what drove me to become a homebrewer was, aside from the kind of the coolness of it, was I fell in love with Belgian ales, and I as kind of a newbie drinker of Belgian ales, I quickly learned that like if I went to the local mega store and one bottle of a good Belgian ale was $5.99, and I'm like, wow, I'm gonna go broke. If I drink two of these a night 5 nights a week, I can't be doing that. So so literally like trying to find a way to brew Belgian ales for $2 a bottle or whatever was what drove me to become a home brewer.
The economics of it.
Yeah,
Exactly.
I get it.
That's awesome.
I'll tell you, you're a man after my own heart because the Belgians have a soft spot in my book as well.
Right. So, so 2 of my favorite places in the world to visit are London and Belgium, and they're a 2-hour train ride apart. So my wife and I have actually gone over a few times in the last 10 years, and I really kind of just fell for both of those beer cultures. So not everything, but I would say 3/4 of the beers that I brew are either English or Scottish styles, or they're Belgian ales of some sort. So
Okay.
I do some German stuff too, but the majority of what I do are those other things.
Yeah. So yeah.
So one of the things
Good
you
on you.
mentioned, that's a great story. Thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah.
One of the things that you mentioned early on when you were talking about your background is you joined a homebrew club very early. Is that right?
I did. So I brewed my first batch in July of 2009, and I joined the club that fall. So like from the day I brewed my first batch to the day I joined the club was like 3 or 4 months.
3 or 4
Smart.
months. Yeah. And that hits really close to home for both George and I, because that's kind of our story too. Like we got into all grain brewing very early,
Mm-hmm.
and we very quickly found ourselves in with a little homebrewers meetup here in the Downers Grove area. And then through some other people that we knew, we found our way to a meeting of the Joliet Brewers Guild. And fast forward now 5+ years, and I've been a member ever since. And it really cannot be understated just, how big that has been as far as just growing both of our knowledges, is having a platform to meet up with other homebrewers and to ask questions and have conversations and build upon the knowledge that we've had. It's been a game changer, to say the least.
Absolutely. And that's a great club. I mean, I joke all the time, and Paula probably knows this, but I'm in Boss, the Brewers of South Suburbia Club, and the Boss is old. I mean, it's been around for 30 years, and back when they formed
30
Boss,
years, my gosh.
Yeah, our 30th anniversary is coming up. But back when Boss formed, there was literally 4 homebrewing clubs in all of Greater Chicagoland, and one of them was barely what you'd call a homebrewing club. Chicago Beer Society was really more of a drinking club even back then.
There's nothing wrong with that.
No, not at all. But then you had Boss down on the south side, and then you had Urban Knaves of Grain out west, and then Babel up to the north, and that was kind of it. And then over the years, smaller clubs kind of popped up to fill in the gaps around those and whatnot. But I think the combination of the proliferation of craft breweries, and also everybody's just year after year increasing awareness of not drinking and driving and whatever, has caused people to want to be more local. And so Boss exists still, but oh my God, it's enormous. I mean, it's like a giant football-shaped territory that goes from the south side of Chicago down to Kankakee, and it goes from Joliet over to Crown Point, Indiana. I mean, it's enormous. And so, I mean, the one good thing about that is there's a lot of people all over that area that are in the club, and we have a lot of breweries to go visit. But the downside is you're driving. Sometimes I drive an hour to get to a Boss meeting, and so I always say, if Boss is not going to, but if it ever just exploded and disappeared, the next day I would join Joliet Brewers Guild because
right on.
Because I live in Crest Hill. I mean, I could get to your meeting in 7 minutes or something.
That'd be a much different atmosphere, I can tell you that.
Absolutely would. Yeah.
Right.
So the only one that I'm not 100% sure about is Babel still around?
You know what? I think they've had some trials and troubles, but I think the club is still around.
Okay.
Their competition has flaked out a couple, 2 of the last 5 years. It didn't happen or something, but
okay.
I think a lot of clubs that run competitions, it's hard, because they find somebody that's good at it, and then everyone just goes, okay, we never have to worry about that again. And after 2 or 3 or 5 years, that person says, wait a minute, this wasn't a lifetime appointment. I didn't say I would do this forever, and they leave, and the club's not prepared to then replace them, and then they have a gap year. So
yeah.
Now, just to give a little plug for Boss, the Brewers of South Suburbia, Boss is the sponsors of the annual Charlie Orr beer competition. What was the first year of the Charlie Orr competition?
So let me get this right. I believe it's on our competition site. I think this is our 29th year.
Oh
So
my gosh!
Yeah, so
I had no idea it had been going on that whole time.
Yeah, the club formed in 1991, and I think either within that first year, either in 1991 or in 1992, they held the first competition. And our own like sort of bragging claim to fame is that that chain has never been broken. We've had an unbroken string of competitions from then until now, and the Spooky Brew that Chicago Beer Society puts on, they had their first one before our first one, but they've had many gaps in there where they had skipped a year here and there because no one would run it. So ours is the longest continuously running Chicago area competition. So we're very proud of that.
So, and feel free to say I don't know if you don't know this, but I've always been curious, and I know it's on your website, and I've never actually read it, and that's my bad, and I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But who exactly was Charlie Orr?
So this is a cool story. So in Blue Island, Illinois, there's actually a pretty happening tiny little beer scene in the old downtown of Blue Island right now, but that's where Blue Island Beer Company is.
We had their main brewer on a couple months ago on the webcast.
Yeah,
Brian Shimkos.
Yep.
Yeah, Brian's awesome. He's a boss member.
Oh, right on.
Yeah. So, anyways, the other end of that strip where Blue Island Brewing Company is, there used to be a Cajun restaurant called the Maple Tree Inn. And unfortunately, about 2 years ago, it caught on fire and basically burned to the ground. But it had been a fixture there for like 35 years or some crazy thing. The guy who started that, the guy who opened it, his name was Charlie Orr. And what's great about this is he was just like a dude from Chicago. Like he was from Chicago, and in the 80s, I think, he like fell in love with the idea of Cajun food. He'd never even been to Louisiana, but like watching like the Cajun cook on TV, he like just fell in love with the idea of it. So he just started getting books and reading about it and trying to cook it and trying recipes, and then whenever he could find a restaurant that was selling that kind of food, he would eat it. Anyways, he fell so in love with that whole culture, he opened a Cajun food restaurant, in Blue Island on the south side of Chicago. And one of his other kind of things was he was having craft beer in there way before anybody else had craft beer in restaurants. So he was a big proponent of beer. And so from, I think, almost the first year that our competition existed until probably 15 years ago, so a good nearly 15-year run, our competition was held at his restaurant.
Okay.
And then he passed away, so then we decided to name the competition after him. So it's the Charlie Orr Memorial Chicago Cup Challenge.
Yeah,
What a great story.
I feel like so many Louisiana Cajun chefs just punch the air, but it's
right.
So yeah, I guess. Well, they rebuilt Maple Tree, didn't they? Or they're in the process of doing so.
They did. It's in Homewood now. They moved it to a different town because the place where it was at, I think Charlie just got it might have even been a house originally. It was like an old structure. And I think he got it for a song in Blue Island, and that's where he opened his restaurant. And it had one little addition on it, but otherwise it was really kind of a cramped, it's like an old restaurant that was making do with a weird old building. But once it like burnt to the ground, they were like, okay, well, why would we recreate all that pain? And they went and found a better building to start over again.
I'll tell you what, some of the best restaurants I've eaten in are exactly like what you just described. It's like this old house that somebody converted, and there's like 3 chairs and there's a line out the door, but I get it. So yeah. So I gotta ask. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, George.
Okay, I gotta ask Scott. So I mean, obviously, you know what you're doing. If you're gonna win Midwest Brewers, if you're gonna win the GABF Pro-Am, I gotta ask, what system what can you describe the system that you're brewing on? What's making this magic?
Sure. So I mean, I'll describe my system, and then I'll talk about my process a little, because I think that probably makes more difference. But my system started, I was an extract brewer for probably a dozen batches before I moved onward. But so initially, like a lot of folks, I was just a 5-gallon kettle on the stove, extract brewing, no temperature control on anything, whatever. So somehow I managed to win a ribbon in a competition with a Belgian ale with that setup, and that's what got me hooked on competitions. I was like, ooh, well, this feels good. Let's keep this going. But I would say I just brewed my 200th batch. I don't know, a couple weeks ago, probably a month ago. So I would say for like the first 25 batches of beer I brewed, it was just a steep rise, like learning curve rise. Like the very first one was not infected and it was pleasant enough to drink, but it had flaws. And so then I would say like, okay, well, I now know that I can make beer. How do I fix this flaw? And I would just attack them one at a time. But anyways, as far as systems, so that was extract. When I first, I was just doing an ice bath for chilling, all those rookie, mistakes. So then when I stopped using tap water and I started buying like RO water from the store, and my beers like improved by like 25% overnight, because our tap water is just miserable here where I live in Crest Hill. And then I bought an immersion chiller so I could chill faster at the end of the brew day, and that helped. But my first big leap was I bought a 5-gallon orange Rubbermaid cooler, and I put a little false bottom in the bottom of it, and I essentially started buying some crushed grains and trying that, and I could not wrap my head around, like, people were telling me like, why did you build a 5-gallon mash tun? And I was like, well, what's the difference? I'll just run more water through it and get all the sugar out. Like, I was like, I can brew any beer. You shut up. So, and it wasn't until I did it a few times before I realized like there's only a finite amount of sugar in that grain. Like, you can't just keep rinsing it and getting more and more sugar out of it.
That is true.
I mean, it's not a complicated concept, but for some reason I couldn't wrap my brain around that at the beginning. But so then pretty quickly I bought a 10-gallon Rubbermaid cooler, put a false bottom and a ball valve on that, and that became my mash tun. And then the 5-gallon cooler I already had just became my hot liquor tank. And so for years and years, what would happen is at the beginning I was batch sparging. So I would put the let me get this right. So this was before I was even using the hot liquor tank for much of anything other than just a spot to put hot water and keep it hot for a while. But I have a workbench in my garage, and then the next level down from that there was just a big chest cooler that I just used as a box, and I put my mash tun on top of that, and then I would run off down into the kettle, which was sitting on my concrete floor in my garage, and I brewed like that for years, and made great beers, but again, I would, by the time I collected all my wort into the kettle, the wort was like, in the wintertime, the wort was like 95 degrees again, because my concrete floor in my garage was, like a frozen slab. So then I started thinking like, okay, I got a handle on all this, but how can I make my day easier? How can I make my day quicker? And I started thinking like, if I could just start heating the wort once I've collected like 2 gallons of it, so it's coming to a boil as I'm finishing collecting the wort, that would save me like a half an hour on my brew day. And so I started looking at problems like that. How can I attack that problem? How can I attack that problem? And then I eventually, my other hobby is woodworking, so I've got a whole wood shop in my garage. So I built a 3-tier, well, technically it's a 2-tier rolling wooden brew stand. And so now my hot liquor tank goes on the top tier, it runs down into my mash tun, which is on the second tier, which runs down into my kettle, which is sitting on the burner, a propane burner, on the floor, and I can start heating it before I'm even done collecting. So that's kind of the setup I have now. And then again, we all do this. You just constantly keep chasing equipment and neato things. So now I have my hot liquor.
Never heard of anybody doing that.
No, absolutely.
So now I have a stainless steel. It's basically the same concept as a the Rubbermaid 10-gallon cooler, except it's made of stainless steel. So there's an inner and outer wall with foam insulation inside of it. So you can't direct heat this thing, but it cleans 10 times easier than a plastic cooler. I mean, you just kind of hit it with a spray gun and it washes right out. It's a beautiful thing.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and And then my hot liquor tank now I have I bought one of the electric. It's really kind of the same concept as one of the all-in-one brewing devices, except it doesn't have a bunch of the bells and whistles. So it's basically just like a giant electric water heater. And I like that because at the beginning of my mash, I can just dump my sparge water in that thing, plug it in, set the temp, and walk away. And by the time an hour goes by, my mash is done. That thing's perfectly at my temperature, and I didn't like screw up and overheat it by 20 degrees because I forgot about it or any of that stuff. It's just kind of set it and forget it. So that's why I love that thing. And I fly sparge. I've been fly sparging for years now.
Do you have some kind of sparge arm to kind of
I do.
soak it?
I don't know if you guys are familiar with Williams Brewing out in California, but it's a little. I've never been there in person, but I hear it's just like a little homebrew shop that, many years ago also put an online store up, and they always source like the coolest equipment. Like they must have somebody on their staff that just looks for weirdo inventions that homebrewers have made, and sometimes the person that invented the little gadget, it takes off and they start a company and on they go. But sometimes they made 200 prototypes and once they're gone, they're gone. And that's kind of the sparge arm I have. I bought it from Williams Brewing, I don't know, 9 years ago or something. And there's nothing, fantastical about it. It's just like a plastic plate that sits across the top of your mash tun. And then there's a stainless steel rod that goes up and down through that plate. And the part above the plate has a hose connected to it and goes up to the hot liquor tank and connects there. Underneath that plastic plate is the spinning arm, and so whenever there's any water flow through this thing, the arm spins. I don't know how the hell that happens. there's some magic in there that's above my head, but I'm like, I hope this thing never breaks because I've looked. The plastic plate over 180 brews was starting to warp and kind of sag, and I was like, eventually this thing's going to break, and I can't find that exact device anywhere. But I bought some angle iron at the store and painted it and bolted it to the plastic thing. So now it's like rock solid again. So I'm probably good for another 200 batches.
So Jason, we got another, example of brewing, creating MacGyvers out of, home brewers. So yeah, sure. Yeah, absolutely. I love that aspect of this hobby.
That is a recurring theme on this weekly webcast. Is as a home brewer, it really forces you to be inventive because there's always going to be some, small problems you have to solve for, or even larger problems that you have to solve for, and you end up, building very unique things to get around those.
So absolutely, it's funny. I can't tell you how many years, but I would say like batch 25 through batch 100 or 125, something like that. So at the beginning, I had a 5-gallon kettle, which I mentioned to you guys earlier, and that thing was super thin. I probably could stab a pencil through it if I got mad enough. And then so I upgraded to a 7.5-gallon kettle because that was like the biggest one the homebrew shop had that I felt was like that wasn't $300. It was like $80 or $85 or something.
Right.
And so for many, like 100 batches, I brewed on a 7.5-gallon kettle. And when I'm brewing English ales, that does not matter at all. But if
low ABV beers,
But if I'm brewing a Belgian triple and I need to collect like 8 gallons of wort and boil it down to 5, that's a challenge. So,
yep, that is.
So what I would do is I would squeeze 6 or maybe 6.5 gallons into the kettle. And then put that on the propane burner, and then continue to collect like another gallon or a gallon and a half of wort. And I would end up doing these crazy like 2.5-hour boils because I would have to boil it down so I could add more wort, and then boil it down so I could add more wort. And so by the time I got all the wort in there and could in any meaningful way start my 60-minute clock, it had already been boiling for an hour and a half probably. And so I had some long boils, but that didn't really adversely affect the beer any. It just made my brew day super long. So now I'm on a 10-gallon kettle, and what finally made me make that leap was I was like, well, if I get a 10-gallon kettle, I can't put it in my sink any longer and use my immersion chiller. My kitchen sink's not big enough.
Right.
So I held off for that for forever, because I was like, well, if I can't put it in the sink, that means I got to switch to some other method of chilling, which means I need a pump, which means I need a stand, which means I need access to water outside. It just snowballed from there, and I ruminated over that for like 5 years until I finally just came up with a plan and went for it and did all those things. But yeah.
So you have a pump now, right? For
I do, yeah.
Various things. So I got to ask the question because it's kind of you go one way or you go the other when you get a pump. Did you go with the tri-clamp or did you go with the quick disconnect?
I went quick disconnect, and I do.
Okay.
I'm sure you guys are familiar with homebrew finds, that email thing.
Oh,
Yes.
yeah.
I've had, there's been times in my life where I unsubscribed from that for 6 months so I would stop spending so much money.
They're on my Twitter and I have to ignore them sometimes. Yeah, that's for sure.
But lately they've been showing a lot of the like, ooh, here's a 1 inch tri-clamp fitting that you can put on your kettle, and I'm like, ooh, that's sexy. Like, I have no reason why I need that whatsoever, but I'm like, that's cool.
Right.
I can feel like a pro brewer, like.
Oh man, yeah. You know what? I brew with some pro brewers, and the tri-clamps, I'm not so. I prefer the quick disconnect. Jason and I both have the quick disconnect as well. The tri-clamps aren't so bad. It's the ones that are kind of the wraparound bracket ones that tend to be a bit of an issue.
Yeah.
I forget what those are called. Do you remember what those are called?
I don't.
Yeah.
I'm just pleased with my direction to go with the quick disconnects. George became a complimentary salesperson, like throughout the whole process of me making the leap over to the pump system, because I was a late adopter to that. George got into that before I did, but from the very beginning, he was like, "You've got to get these quick disconnects. You've got to get these quick disconnects." And sure enough, I got him, and he was right. So
tri-clamp is the wraparound one that is kind of annoying. The one I was thinking about that was not so there's two types of quick disconnects. There's the ball lock to a disconnect, and then there's the snap lock where you actually like pull the two kind of lever things.
We have the snaps.
That's what I have. I have a cam lock one. So
cam lock. Thank you. Yeah. So that's like, what I was thinking about.
Yeah. So my kettle, the output of my kettle, there's a valve, and then past the valve is the male cam lock fitting, and then my hoses have female fittings on the ends of them. So you put you put the female over the male, and then the two cams have to swing back the other direction and lock it in place. So it's whatever. It's what when I was looking at all the various types of quick disconnects on the market at the time I built my system, that was the one that I was like, yeah, I can, like, those big levers, I can cinch that thing down. That's never going to leak. So that was kind of what sold me on it. And,
So Scott, we can't see you, but can you see the screen?
Yeah, I see grains on the screen.
No.
Well, can you see the screen share?
Oh, no. What I'm seeing is just a nice place to brew background screen with a bunch of grains.
Okay. All right. Well, so what I'm showing is kind of the cam lock setup right now with the two key rings on it, and that you pull back and you lock it in place. Yeah, so that's what you have. Okay, so Jason and I went a slightly different direction, and the cam locks work great, but the direction we went was kind of the ball lock version, or you just kind of pull the collar back and put it on. And I've actually had really good luck, and from what I've read, that those work really well. So we went with that, but as long as you're not going with the standard tri-clamp, because I'm sorry, those are a pain in the ass.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm not saying I'll never switch to those, because now that I've been using them for a while, in the wintertime, when the little plasticky gaskets on the inside the fitting are really cold, if I don't dip them in like hot water or something to soften them up first, and I try to just put that thing on and then cam lock it in, it's like you got to be like Hercules to lock those cams down. So
yeah, I get that. Yeah, and you're right. The tri clamps do kind of fix that problem because you have the gasket in between, but you're not so much putting pressure on that gasket as you are kind of getting the two metal pieces to join together.
right.
So
Right, exactly.
that would probably be a little bit easier.
For sure.
Yeah.
So here's a question for you. So we have a motto on this show, and we end each show by saying the line, "It takes a lot of good beer to make great beer," which Paulie recently recoined as "it takes a lot of shitty beer to make good beer," which I think was brilliant.
But then you can
anyways,
take that good beer and make great beer.
Exactly. So making good beer, great beer. You mentioned one thing earlier on that that switching away from your local water to RO water was one of the game changers for you. What else throughout kind of your evolution as a home brewer really changed the quality of your beer?
So that's a great question, and I would say there's 4 or 5 things that whenever I'm talking to a newbie, I'm like, just forget everything else and focus on these. So the first one is your water. Like, you don't use water from the water softener. Don't use water that came out of your tap and has a funny sulfur smell. There's no magic involved in this process. It's going to turn weird water into great beer. It's not going to happen. So, water is a big one. And then yeast. Yeast is my favorite part of this whole hobby. Like the whole, what they are, how they behave, how we corral them into doing what we want them to do in the right way. That's like my favorite part of the hobby. So, I'm just making sure that you pitch plenty. I'm in the Jamil Zainashev camp of like, it's really hard for a home brewer to over pitch. So use tons of healthy, happy yeast, and then control the fermentation temperature. If you just let it go bonkers, it's going to produce, off flavors and aromas and, whatever. And I tell newbies, I'm like, don't let that stop you. Like, don't wait until you have $3,000 worth of equipment before you start brewing. I'm not saying you're going to make terrible beer. I'm saying if you want to make great beer, you have to do these things. So, coming back to one of the earlier points is, as a home brewer, how do you find hacks to achieve the same thing? Oh, I was one of those guys that had like my bucket fermenter sitting in the bathtub with a t-shirt over it, soaking up water so that when it would evaporate, it would cool the bucket. And I had a fan blowing on it to even speed up that process. And, I could lower the temp of inside that fermenter by like 2 or 3 degrees with that. But, when I realized that, here's an extreme, just as a sidebar, I before I finished off my basement in my house, it was just a blank, empty concrete box. And one January, the concrete floor in the basement, I used a thermometer to measure it, and it was like 59 degrees. This is the temperature of that concrete slab. And I had a bucket of Belgian triple that I had just, brewed like the day before, and it was really rocking. Like, it was at the peak of, fermentation. And I sanitized a lab thermometer and popped that bucket open and took the temperature inside, and it was like 77 degrees. so that,
oh my,
that wort was 18 degrees warmer than the concrete heat sink it was sitting on. And I was like, okay, that's something I need to work on. So controlling the temperature of fermentation has made it probably one of the largest differences in my beers, bar none. And then you got to use fresh ingredients, old hops and old grain that wasn't stored properly, that might have gotten humidity struck for 2 years or something. You're not going to make great beer with those things. So you got to use fresh ingredients. And then I always tell people also, not all the time, but 90% of the time, simple is probably better when it comes to homebrew recipes. So, you don't need to put 11 grains in every beer. And, I think that the yeast contributes, other than like when you're using Cal Ale yeast or something where you're just trying to find a yeast that disappears flavor-wise. But English and Belgian styles, like I like to brew, I think the yeast are every bit as important as the other ingredients when it comes to flavor. Like,
if not more.
Exactly.
If not more, yeah.
Yeah. So, I do a fair amount with like the Belgians. They don't put 7 grains unless they are doing it for a purpose, but they don't really put 7 grains in their beer. Right? There's like 2 or maybe.
Yeah,
3.
no, true enough. So I got a question about that RO water, because RO water can sometimes be detrimental to beer because of the lack of minerals or anything that's in it, because it's basically just straight, H2 and O. And so do you add gypsum and calcium and everything like that to it to balance the water profile?
I do, but I err on the side of caution with that. So, are you guys familiar with the Gordon Strong book, Brewing Better Beer?
Yes. Yeah.
So Gordon, in that book, I mean, it's a good book. It's an entertaining read, but I got that book when it first came out 7 or 8 years ago, whenever it was, and I couldn't tell you the page number, but there's one page in that book where I'm like, this page was what was worth the price of the book. And he said, essentially, I mean, he's a master judge level 29 or whatever the hell. And he said he has had so many homebrews that were ruined by adding, like, overdosing the water with brewer's salts of various kinds. So, his thing is, and hang on, I got to go to look at my cheat sheet because I can never remember these chemical names. So, gypsum, for instance, is for hoppy beers. Calcium carbonate is for dark beers, and calcium chloride is for malty beers. So what he was saying is, if you're only going to use one of those, use no more than like a half a teaspoon for a 5-gallon batch of beer.
Yep.
And if you're going to use 2 of those, because it might be hoppy and dark or whatever, that's fine. But then use a 1/4 teaspoon of each. So, I do use RO water and build it up, but Gordon in his book says, hey, I would much rather have a beer that was made with no RO water and no additions than RO water and too many additions. So
right,
the safer path is to use less versus more. And
go
ahead.
I was gonna say, I totally get that. So do you kind of go with that aspect just based on what style is, what kind of salts you add, or do you, like Jason and I both use the brew and water calculator to try to, and based on our water profiles and what we're brewing, to try to balance what we're putting in by way of salts and achieve the best product. Do you use something like that?
I don't really, because
Okay.
I will admit to you, like I read all 4 of the books in the Brewers Association Elements series, the water, malt, hops, and yeast books, and malt, hops, and yeast, those books were a joy, and water was like, oh my god,
Oh my god,
it was like a college textbook. I read that thing, but it was miserable. I hated every second of it, and so I guess the little kernel of wisdom or whatever, the pithy little thing that I've heard that I always stick with is, when you test the water, like the town I live in is on a well. It's city water, but it comes out of a well. Well, it depends on what time of the year you test it, and almost what week of the year you test it. You'll get different readings on different, of those elements, and so there's that.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is, when I first started homebrewing, like, the holy grail was for somebody to find out what's the water profile where the brewery is, where they make Guinness, because I'm going to make a Guinness clone. I want to mimic that water profile.
Yeah.
But, you can get the city water report for Dublin, but that doesn't mean.
But they change it.
Yeah.
Well, that doesn't mean they're not
Yeah.
doing their own additions before they brew that.
Absolutely.
Right.
I mean, in general, historically, yes, there's a reason why dark beers were brewed there, because the water chemistry generally favors dark beers. But that doesn't mean that in the centuries since then, Guinness didn't learn how to doctor the water in an even different way. And so, yeah, I kind of just have more of a hands-off thing with water. I just try to leave it alone as much as I can, and I just start with RO and add between 1/4 and a half a teaspoon of whichever of those salts I think is most appropriate, and just go from there.
Right. You must be doing something right. Yeah.
We got a quick comment in the chats. Sean from Mad Hatchet Brewing out of Shorewood just chimed in and said the new Beersmith version 3.0 has a really great water calculator. So that gives you a second
I
tool.
would agree with that.
Yes, I agree. I agree too. So you can use the brew and water calculator. George and I both use it. We're both proponents of it. I think it works very effectively. And for those of you who are Beersmith users for your recipes and for your brew days, there's a water piece in there as well.
Hey, do we have time for me to say a quick thing about brewing calculators?
Of course.
So
yeah, absolutely.
When I first started brewing, my guru, the guy I work with, was like, take notes on every batch, take a lot of notes, because if you make a great beer, you want to be able to reproduce it, and so forth and so on. And then he was like, try to find a brewing calculator, and I was like, a what? So I went online, and back then there was this thing called Beer Calculus, and it was just a free service online, and I think you were allowed to store your recipes on the site, but I learned pretty quickly that just because there's 10,000 recipes on that site doesn't mean that any of them are any good. so you had to keep that in mind, because kind of the cost of the cost you paid, the price you paid for using this free calculator was your recipes lived on the site where everyone else in the world could see them.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so just because a brewer had my stepson is a home brewer too, and he used to sit there as a bored college student and write recipes all day. He probably never brewed any of them, so you couldn't trust the quality of those recipes that are there. But the service was free, and I liked it because the ingredient, when you were building your recipe in the calculator part, the ingredients that were already in there matched what was available at my local homebrew shops. Like, I didn't have to add anything and figure that out; they were already all in there. Well, then one day they announced that they got bought by another company, and Beer Calculus became Brewtoad, and I stuck with it for years because it was free, but instantly, like, they didn't import Beer Calculus's ingredients inventory, so I think Brewtoad must have been from like the West Coast or something. Anyways, there was no Thomas Fawcett in there. Like, I'm like, I brew almost exclusively with Thomas Fawcett, and so I'm trying to either enter grains or try to figure out, they have a 70 Levabon crystal, and my Thomas Fawcett I like is 60. Is that close enough? Whatever. Anyways, so I used it because it was free and I'm cheap, but that eventually died about a year ago, and I finally broke down and bought Beersmith, and oh my God, I mean, I'm like the guy that needed, I don't know, a screwdriver, and somebody handed me a 300-piece Swiss Army knife, so it's
right.
It's I've barely scratched the surface of that thing. I've been using it for a year, and I know that it can do all the things I would ever need in regard to brewing, but I already have my own tried and true systems worked out for all those things. So really all I'm using it for is just really this time the hops I got are 9% alphas instead of 8. So how many do I put in instead of what I put in last time? That's literally what I'm doing with it. But I know it's an expensive tool just to be doing that with, but
it is. But I'll tell you, Jason and I have been using it pretty much ever since we started going with all grain, because we needed something that was, I think, the first thing we stumbled on. So, and that was back when you basically bought it outright before they did any subscription and things like that. But, I'd say you're right, though. It is an increasingly slow. So as they are adding in things like the water calculator and things like that, it's like a 600-piece Swiss Army knife. But
right.
It's also, as far as the way that at least I use it, Jason, I don't want to speak for you here, but it's also kind of intuitive in how you add things and things like that. So it can be intimidating, but it's one of those things that I think if you just take it slowly and realize you're not going to know everything about it from the word go, you can learn about it over time, and you'll get better and use it and be able to use it better over time.
Sure.
Yeah, for sure.
So there's 2 free tools online that I've been using for years and years. One is called BrewCalcs, and I don't know who created this site, but you just type BrewCalcs into Google and it'll take you there. And that's what I use for my strike water temperature. So, it'll say, okay, how many pounds of grain do you have? What's the temperature of your grain? And then, what's your quarts per pound ratio that you want? And what's your target, mash temperature? And then just enter, and it'll say, okay, heat your strike water to this temperature. And then it'll say, like, okay, do you want to do a second, do you want to raise the temperature by additions of hot water? Like, do you want to do a second sparge addition, and what temp do you want to raise it to, and yada, yada. So that's what I use for my sparge water temperatures. I know Beersmith does that, but I'm like, I never.
Well,
point, I never want to experiment with a batch at this point. I'm like, oh, I know this works.
No, and I totally get it. We all, zero in on those tools that we like, and it's one of those things that we have our way. We plug things into Beersmith. We use it. I use Beersmith to the point where I've dialed in my equipment to within a degree.
Nice.
And but that takes time.
Yeah.
So what you're talking about is, a completely different way of going. And it just goes to show that no matter what you're doing, it's not so much about the tools you're using, it's about the person that's using those tools.
Right.
And about how refined you can get as a home brewer. So if you don't, and that's part of what I really like about home brewing as a hobby is you don't have to have, hundreds of thousands of dollars to be good at it. You can use these free tools online. You can refine your skills. And as you get better, it doesn't matter what you're using so long as you know and get better at how you're doing it. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And, to that point, when someone like sticks their nose up in the air because someone handed them a beer that they made with extract, and I'm like, hey, knowing what I know now, if I had a large enough kettle to do a full wort boil and I did proper, chilling of the wort at the end, and I used fresh extract, of course, and I managed the temperature of the fermentation, I'm sure I could make a great beer with extract. I'm just not set up to do it anymore, but I could.
Well, you have a bunch of members in Boss, but I can tell you, even with my small homebrew club, some of the best beers that I have month over month came from an extract brewer or a mini mash brewer.
Right.
Somebody that doesn't have a whole ton of equipment and is just getting into it and really paying attention to the fundamentals.
Yeah, there's a guy in my club who's probably 61 or 62, and he's been brewing for 40 years probably. And at one point in his life, he did do all grain stuff, but he's older and he wants to lift and tote fewer things, and he wants to spend less time on it. But he knows all the tricks, and he makes absolutely great beer. And his brew day is 2 hours long. So I'm like, wow, there's some wisdom there, I guess. But
sure,
there is.
Yeah, how's life been during the quarantine?
It's funny. This is probably not unique to anybody really, but many of us have like the cellar of ooh, look at this barrel aged stout. I'll lay this down and I'll drink it in 3 years, kind of thing, and it gets out of hand, So I probably a year prior to the quarantine, I had this beer cellar that was just ridiculous. There was, I don't know, a couple hundred bottles probably. I don't know. It was nuts. And, homebrew, commercial beers, all kinds of stuff that, can age, but there's just so much of it. It's like this beer is going to die before I get to it. So about a year and a half ago, I made a conscious effort to just like stop buying as much beer and drink homebrew and drink down my cellar. And I made huge progress on that. But then the quarantine happened, and then it was like the pendulum almost swung the other way. I'm like, holy crap! I'm like 2 months away from having no cellar. Like this is this is amazing. But it was good. I mean, I as a director of a public library, we shut down like hard. March 14th was a Saturday. And we were open the 13th, and then March 14th we closed, and everybody just sat at home for 11 weeks. And I mean, I went into work, once or twice a week for an hour here, 2 hours there, just to catch up on emails or whatever. But we were basically just shut down, So, yeah, I did some brewing, and my wife and I went on. The one thing we're blessed with in this part of Chicagoland that we live in is we're within a half an hour drive of probably 20 trails or public parks that are fun to walk in or ride bikes in or whatever. So
Yeah.
we did tons of outdoor stuff because that's what you could do, and I joked at one point. I was like, I never thought I'd say this, but when every day is Saturday and you never have to go to work, it's kind of like a lot of the luster fell off of drinking beer. it's like it almost lost its novelty. I'm not saying I stopped, but I don't know. When you work all day, it's like you can't wait to go home and kick back and have a beer. But when you were home all day doing nothing, it's like, yeah. After the 5th day in a row of drinking all the beer you wanted, it's like I don't even feel like having a beer. So
I get that.
Well, it's one of those things that nobody had a reference point for until this year, because there's never been anything like this, even remotely.
Right.
So
yeah, it's not like retirement, because in retirement you can go places and do things.
Yeah.
But if you're just stuck in your house all day every day, it's like I don't know. So I kind of my wife and I kind of got into cocktails. I dug out this really cool old cocktail book, and every day or every other day I would make a different kind of old timey cocktail, and we'd try that out. So.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Have you had a good series of brew days during this time?
Yeah. Well, we were talking about my homebrew club's competition and how long it's run, and it was supposed to be. It's always the 4th Saturday in March.
Mm-hmm.
So I had literally 2 meads and 8 beers or some crazy thing that I had brewed to enter into the competition in March, and then the competition didn't happen, and so I went into quarantine with a keezer just jammed full of homebrew. So I didn't have to brew very much out of necessity, but I think the first beer I brewed during quarantine was. Last year I started this tradition, and this year I repeated it. I brewed a dandelion saison, and when the dandelions come in the spring, and there's 3 billion of them everywhere, I got kind of just fascinated with the idea of adding the flowers to a saison, and I broke one of my own rules last year, and I changed 2 things at once in a recipe, and I didn't hate the beer, but I didn't love it as much as I wanted to, but I didn't know which thing made it not as wonderful as I wanted it to be.
Right.
So I used a yeast strain I'd never used before, and then I added dandelions, which I'd never done before. And it turned out it was the yeast strain that I didn't love. So this year I just to use something that's tried and true, I just used the Y yeast French saison yeast, and then did everything else the same. And it's just a simple Pilsner malt with a little bit of wheat and a little bit of Munich. And then 8 ounces of honey at flame out, and then the dandelions bagged up and thrown in at flame out, and just kind of whirlpooled for a while. Yeah.
So what does dandelions add to a beer?
So it adds. It's hard to describe. It's I don't want to say grassy because that sounds so bad, but like an earthy. It almost tastes like a combination of grass, but in a pleasant way, and lemon for some reason. This might just be my mind because they're yellow, but I swear I've asked people, do you get this tiniest hint of a citrus fruit? And they're like, yeah, maybe lemon. So there's something about dandelions that has just a kiss of a lemon note. And then, all the usual kind of funk and complexity of a saison wrapped around all that, and it all kind of comes together nice. And that's what I'm drinking tonight, actually, while we're talking.
Well, it's funny you should say that, because I was telling Jason before you came on that what I had was a bit of a mystery beer, and I figured out that it was my saison, and I was telling Jason I was getting a little bit of a minty kind of flavor off of it, because this is an older one.
Yeah, that
and
can
so
happen.
I was well, but what I figured it out was it's the ginger. That's in it. It has really become pronounced in the beer as it's aged, because it was ginger, orange peel, and black pepper.
Sure. Yeah.
And the ginger has really come out in that and has made it a much different beer than what I had before, and I like it a whole lot better. And it's kind of concerning to me, because now I'm wondering, do I need to cellar this saison for a while before I drink it? Which would be unfortunate because I don't wanna. I want to drink it.
Right.
Yeah.
It's funny.
So
The old adage I heard when I first became a homebrewer is your homebrew is ready to start drinking as you finish the last one. And
yeah,
and I think
and there's
that's
certain
true to a certain extent, but it depends on the
yeah.
style, of course, and whatnot. But
So one of the things that is a big deal when you're in competitions is clarity.
yeah.
So how do you handle that? Do you just do a standard cold crash? Do you add gelatin? Do you filter?
So I do a couple of things that might not be typical. I don't know. So when I when I set up my current system and I got the pump and all that, so to chill, I liked the efficiency. Like I could wrap my brain around the efficiency of a plate chiller, but there were too many problems that I just couldn't solve in my mind to buy one. One
Okay.
being those little tubes in there are so tiny that the tiniest little thing could plug them up, or how do I clean that thing? Like I don't know. So
I'm with you.
I bought a counterflow chiller, and I got it from Williams. I think the company that makes these often calls them Chillzillas. They make copper ones and they also make stainless steel ones, and I got a stainless steel one when I bought mine. But so it's just like a pipe inside of a pipe, and the pipe that the wort is flowing through is probably 3/8 or ½ inch in diameter maybe, and then the outer pipe is like 3/4 of an inch, and so the wort's going one way, the cold water's going the other. You get the idea.
Mm-hmm.
So it's good. It's not as efficient as a plate chiller though, so I can't just run my wort out of my kettle through the pump through this chiller and then straight into my fermenter, because in one go it won't get cold enough. So what I do is I come out of the kettle, go through the pump, through the chiller, and then back into the kettle. I just make that loop.
Okay.
And when I first do flame out, I set up that loop and I just run it hot for like 3 to 5 minutes as one final like sanitation step on the chiller, and then I turn on the chiller water, but I let it still just keep recycling into the kettle, and it drops pretty fast. I mean, I can go from, at that point it's probably 195. The temperature is 195, and I can go from there to 68 in all times of year except right now, in less than 15 minutes. So I'm pretty happy with it.
Yeah.
And then though, I take that hose, flop it out of the top of the kettle and over into my fermenter, but hanging inside my fermenter is a 1 micron screen basket, and so I use painter strainer bags for my hops. I don't have them loose in the kettle anymore, and then I do this 1 micron filter of the wort before it goes into the fermenter, with the idea that I want absolutely zero vegetal matter and as much of the protein as I can filter out of that wort before it even goes in the fermenter. And it's not a huge amount that I filter, but at the end, when all my wort's in the fermenter and I take that little strainer basket out, it's got probably 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch of just like protein sludge in the bottom of it that didn't make it into the fermenter.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing I do. And then I just ferment normally, how I normally would. And then when it's done, then I used to just cold crash, and I know that's what pro breweries do. They just turn on the glycol and just crash that thing. But now I've started to be gentler about that. I read that somewhere, and I don't know if it's doing anything or not. But instead of just taking it when it's absolutely done fermenting, and let's say the fermenter's sitting there at 68 or 70 degrees, I don't put it in a temp controlled chamber and crank it down to like 35. I'll crank it down like 5 or 10 degrees a day until it gets down to, say 35, and then let it set for a few days, and then rack it to keg and see how I did. And if I'm using an English yeast, it's you could read the newspaper through it at that point. If I'm using certain Belgian strains or whatever less flocculent strains, it goes maybe a little hazy into the keg. But most of those, if I'm just willing to leave it for 3 weeks, it'll clear up. And then if it hasn't, then I'll put gelatin in the keg. So that's like my ace in the hole. The last thing I'll do if I just can't get it to clear is use gelatin in the keg.
Right.
I let it bloom and add that right to the keg.
So
yeah, go ahead.
You basically do the ending steps of a lager you know, where you're stepping it down to near freezing for an ale yeast as well to try to crash it out slowly.
Right. And
that's interesting.
And the reason why I do that is I've read enough things that say that, you know, the yeast during fermentation, they were stressed, and so they squirted out all the bad things, you know, diacetyl and acetaldehyde and all that crap. And then, you know, you got to let them recover and soak all those things back up, which, you know, good brewers will do. But then I've heard that, like, well, now they're all fat and bloated again, and if you stress them, they'll squirt it out, or at least some of it out again. So taking them down to temperature slowly is a much less chance of stressing them and causing any diacetyl or anything else to come out.
But that's got to extend your fermentation profile. Like so obviously you keg from what you're saying.
Yeah, I keg.
So
yeah,
from brewing to tap, how, you know, are you looking at month and a half?
Oh, no. I don't let it sit down at the lager temp for a long time. So, you know, obviously the length of fermentation differs depending on how strong the beer is and all those other things. But let's say from the time I declare, like, okay, this beer has hit target gravity and the yeast have cleaned everything up and it's done and ready to do something with now, I'll put that in I have a chest freezer with a temp controller on it, and I'll put it in there and I'll drop it, you know, 5 degrees a day, you know, for 4 or 5 days, whatever it takes to get it down to into the 30s. And then I might let it sit one more day, and then I'll keg it. You know, so I'm not really lagering it for a long time. I'm just slowly taking it down to clarify it, you know.
Right. No, that makes sense. Yeah, I just recently made a shandy, a lemon lime shandy.
Nice.
And yeah, no, it turned out pretty well. It's got a very subtle kind of lemon lime flavor to it, which I like. I dialed back on the citrus a little bit this time around. But, you know, the clarity of it is not exactly where I wanted it to be. So I was considering a couple things. One was adding gelatin to the keg.
Right.
And, you know, the other part was just basically giving it time, because I know that it will filter out. And to be perfectly honest, I don't know if what I've pulled out, because I just pulled the first couple pours out of it. I don't know if I've basically pulled out cold crashed, you know, sediment and trub and things, and if it will clear up in the next, you know, 2 or 3 pulls off of it. Right. So, you know, it's one of those things that, does it really affect the taste of the beer or anything? No. Am I being a perfectionist and want a clear shandy? Yes.
Right.
And, you know, and I think a little bit of what contributed to the haziness that I'm seeing, it's not really haziness, is like a cold haze, is the citrus, you know, because because I added not only the peel but the juice as well to it from 1.5 lemons and limes. So I think that's contributing to it as well.
I think it could. And when did you add those juices? Like, what point in the process?
Secondary.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So I did that.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say I did that in secondary. I left it for, I think, 4 days, and then I racked off into the keg.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've tasted some homebrew brews from newbies that were like, you know, here, try my cherry beer, and I'm like, dear God, what happened to it? And it's like, well, they put the cherries in the boil, so they got like a lot of pectin and, you know, the pectin haze.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I've learned my lesson on that one, and you know, early on. And if I'm doing a fruit addition, I'll typically add it in secondary. And it's weird because, like, I'm not a big fan. If I get a Corona, it doesn't have a lime in it. If I get a Blue Moon and they automatically throw an orange in it, I'm upset. You know, if my feeling about it is, if you're gonna have citrus in a beer, have citrus in the beer. Make it part of the beer. Don't add it as an addition.
Right. The brewer should have put it in, not the bartender. Right.
Right. That's kind of my thought on it. So.
Yeah, I'm with you there.
Yeah. So I don't want to keep you all night. If you need to jump, just, you know, Jason had to jump for a second, but he'll be back in a minute. But if you need to get going, just let us know. I've had a blast talking to you. I hope you've had fun tonight.
Yeah, it was great.
Yeah. The one last thing that I'm curious about, because a lot of homebrewers are kind of getting into this as well, and I've heard the BJCP is considering adding a category for this. Have you done anything with the hard seltzer kind of?
I haven't, and I know this is. I don't have any philosophical problem with them, but just for whatever reason, I don't know that I've ever had one. Like, I just haven't. I don't know. Whatever. The situation hasn't presented itself yet to where I've drank one. so
right.
I understand that they're a phenomenon, and I think a lot of it is because they're just lower calorie. But I mean, I have pro brewer friends that they're like. It's kind of like a fun thing, and I'm sure you see this too, but a fun thing in the craft beer world that when pro brewers aren't in front of their fans, they're at home having like a Miller High Life or a hard seltzer or something, like because they get their fill of craft beer when they're at work, and they whatever.
A little bit of variety, right?
I guess, but
yeah,
like a good friend of mine is a partner owner in the brewery that he brews for, and yeah, I mean that guy will crush like 15 Busch Lights when he's camping on the weekend when he's camping, but then 3 days later he's at work and he's arguing about the hop profile in 2 different New England IPAs, so he's, I don't know, I think I'm kind of a believer that every beer style has its place. For a while everyone was like, oh, anti big breweries, and I don't love their business practices at all. I don't love that aspect of them, and I don't love that they dumbed down American beer culture for 100 years. I don't love that either, but I'm not above on a hot day when you're playing softball having a Miller High Life or something with the gang. I'll do that too. So it's
yeah, no, I'm totally with you. We were adding a lean-to onto my shed so I could park my mower underneath it. And we were definitely roofing and drinking Miller Ultras, Michelob
Right.
Ultras.
Yeah.
And
George
it's
was
a good
popular
one.
guy.
It's one that you can drink like, a dozen of them and not really be drunk and still be able to roof, put shingles on a roof. So, yeah.
Right.
I get it. Yeah.
Yeah, there's one of my favorite ways to blow beer drinkers' minds who aren't into craft beer and they don't know a lot about the brewing process. This is my understanding anyways, like at Anheuser-Busch when they brew Budweiser, they brew a mother beer, and everybody thinks of like they're these brewing scientists, and they're like some of the best in the world, but nobody's good enough to have a lager finish exactly at 4.000% ABV every single time.
Yeah.
So they brew a mother beer that's like 7 or 8%, and then they just wait and see what they got, and then they add the appropriate amount of water to it to water it down to exactly the 5% or 5.5, whatever Budweiser is, or they add more water to it to water it down to exactly the 4.2 that Bud Light is. And so yeah, there's a lot of science involved in that, but once you know the ABV of the beer you're starting with, and you know how much it gets watered down per gallon of water that you add, at that point it's just math. So anyways, I like to blow people's minds by saying like, yeah, that Bud Light, that's just Budweiser and water. Like you just paid the same amount for lesser beer.
You just blew my mind with that.
Yeah.
I admit I did not know that that's how they dialed in their ABV, is just by diluting it with water.
Yeah.
That makes so much sense, though.
It's so much more of an efficient way to produce 1 billion gallons of beer like they do every year, and have it be absolutely the same as the 1 billion gallons that they made last year. So it's
I've heard a lot of people that have given compliments to the brewing staff at the major breweries like Miller and Budweiser for their ability to produce the same product over and over again to the same specifications that we all know. Like people talk about, like, if you drink a 6-pack of Budweiser here in the Midwest, you can drink that exact same 6-pack on the West Coast, a week later, and it'll be the exact same beer.
Exactly.
And there's something to be said about that. That you can that you can continue to make. I mean, quality is a piece of that, but I'll say the same product over and over and over again. There you go. That's the key word: consistency.
Yeah, it's quality control, consistency, and it's more than impressive. I mean, it's staggering, that they're able to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I agree. No, I mean, my Mike, my buddy who, got me into homebrewing, and it's funny, we've never brewed together. He's never been to my house on the day that I was brewing.
You got to fix that.
I know, right? but he's helped me immensely just with having 3 million conversations about brewing and beer. But anyways, he told me many, many years ago, and I think this is still true. If they put their mind to it, if they wanted to, they could just they could just put out of business craft breweries left and right, because they have the money and the clout to lock up all the contracts. Like, the only reason why craft breweries can get cool hops is because those breweries don't want them. but if they did, God help us, and they have the brewing scientists and the mad skills to do anything they want. What holds them back is what their driving thing is always, what is someone who doesn't really like beer going to drink? And it's not our beer; it's what they brew. So they're lowering it to that denominator that keeps them out of our sort of sandbox. But
yeah, I think it's two different markets. As much as we are, get cranky with the major brewers, and they've kind of stepped their toe into that a little bit with like the purchase of Goose Island and other things like that. But it's two different markets, because you're right. It's a different style. It's like Amish furniture versus IKEA. There's two different markets you're going after there.
Right. Yeah. That's a good analogy, really.
Well, I'm full of them. Yeah, if you listen to us, I'm full of those kinds of analogies.
Well, it's funny. Like I probably started drinking craft beer in 2006. I mean, true craft beer. I was drinking like better beer before that, but I was, like say Guinness or Bass. I was drinking those for a long time, but I was drinking true craft beer probably starting from 2006 onward, and so I still kind of felt like a newbie. That was, granted, I was like, forehead deep in the culture, but I still kind of felt like a newbie. And now I'm like that old man that's like, get off my lawn, because I didn't reject outright the whole, hazy IPA thing. Many of those are delicious, but what's bothering me now, and this is just my own, whatever 2 cents, is I think that the craft beer world spent 25 years trying to attract the masses to our way of drinking.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's like, be careful what you wish for, because now there's a bunch of people who drink nothing but craft beer, and they've only ever had maybe 4 different styles of beer. And they're spending huge dollars. And so my local shop, there's a here in the south and southwest suburbs of Chicago, kind of the not new, but in the last 5 years, the new model of store is like the open bottle or iron and glass, where it's a bottle shop, but also has a bar inside of it. So
I love it.
Yeah,
I love that model.
I love that too.
Yeah. And when the open bottle first opened, it's a 35-minute drive from my house on a good day, and I was still going to it. And then my friends gave me a lot of crap because Iron and Glass opened, and I can walk there from my house. So I dropped the open bottle like a hot rock and just started going to the one that was, a mile from my house. But anyways, I love that place, and I know the owners, and we're friends and all that. It's two married couples that own it. But probably 3 months before the whole the pandemic happened, I said to one of the owners, I'm like, Eric, if you had to put a percentage on it, what percentage of your packaged beer that goes out the door is either a New England IPA, a milkshake IPA, or a pastry stout? And he's like, oh God, probably 90%.
I believe that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And-
I believe it
that
too.
remaining 10% is probably Imperial Stouts.
Right. And I love that place, but I hate to say it, but I found myself going back to Binny's because it's like I want to get a porter, I want to get a Kolsch, I want to get a Belgian ale, or and I just can't get those things in my beloved, little mom and pop beer shop because, and I don't blame them. All the young guys that want to spend half their paycheck every week, all they buy are New England IPAs and milkshake IPAs. And so I can't blame them for chasing that money because they're raking it in. I mean, they're just killing it.
Well, one of the things that
Little bit
we've talked about a lot on this webcast and in our podcast is every year there's a go-to beer flavor.
Right.
And New
Yeah.
England has proven to kind of transcend that because they came on really strong, about a year and a half ago. And I think they've proven that they're here to stay. Like that hazy style and that, those juicy flavors people
Right.
have caught on, and it's going to stick around. But outside of that, there's definitely something to be said about, people's tastes just evolve, and there's a go-to flavor each year. So naturally, places like that are going to accommodate that, as best they can. But can it risk, alienating, having the variety which people appreciate about craft beer? That's true as well. So I hear what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, I
Well,
think
and the other part of it.
Go
Oh,
ahead.
sorry, Scott. Go ahead.
no worries. Go ahead.
All right, I was gonna say the other part of it too is if you're gonna open a place like Iron and Glass, which is the bar inside with package beer in there too, I feel like you almost have, and this is a bit strong, but a moral obligation to have at least a little bit of variety on your taps, especially if you're like, there's a place down near my in-laws that literally has 100 taps lined up.
Yeah.
So if, I feel like there's a little bit of an obligation there that if you're going to say, I am a craft beer tap house, that you have at least some that expose people to different styles so they know what's out there. Because I think part of the problem is the reason why 90% of those people are going after those 4 styles is because they don't know what else there is.
Exactly.
They don't know,
Yeah.
those other ones. So I think the when I say it's a moral obligation, it's kind of like a business moral obligation because it'll expand the market and give them more options to purchase, which from a business standpoint is never a bad thing.
Right. Well, they, in
Yeah.
pre-COVID times, they did a pretty fair job at that with the taps. It's the packaged
Mhm.
beers is what I'm talking about. But the taps, they have 12 taps there, and one of them is almost always either a mead or a cider. So 11 beer taps, and they would do a good job of trying to mix it up and not just have those 3 styles. But yeah, I don't know. It just like I said, I can't fault them because in a way you're right. There's like the obligation to the craft and to the history. But man, can they just rake in some cash if they just buy whatever Hop Butcher puts in a can? Like, it's.
I mean, I can't fault them for that either. I totally get what you're saying. So
Yeah.
The
yeah.
So I mentioned Jamil Zainasheff earlier, and I wouldn't say I was an early listener to the Brewing Network, but later on when I discovered it, I would listen to those podcasts, going back like 10 years almost, when I would be out like walking at nighttime just for exercise. But he coined a phrase one time that I just loved, and he was talking about beer, and he said, yeah, this style doesn't have a lot of pushback. And they were like, pushback? What do you mean? And he goes, when you're drinking it, he goes, when you're drinking a beer with 0 pushback, like you can take a huge gulp and like straighten your arm back down and say 3 words to somebody and then take another huge gulp. Like there's nothing slowing you down. It's like water. And he goes, but when during the arms race,
That's a good way to describe that.
Yeah,
Pushback? Is that
Yeah.
what the term?
he called it pushback, right?
Yeah.
So,
Interesting.
I
So
like
he-
that.
So he was like during the arms race of IBUs back in the the mid 2000s when everyone wanted to try to get
Oh, for
130
Christ's
IBUs, 150 IBUs, whatever. He he's like, I'm not saying those beers were terrible. They were a thing, you know, they were a phenomenon for a while, but they had huge pushback. Like, you weren't going to sit down and drink 520 IBU beers in a row. You just could not. Like, you were just exhausted by the end of that. You just wouldn't do it. My theory is that, you know, we went from the crazy high IBUs, and we kind of flowed right into, you know, the New England hazy IPA thing, and it was, you know, the people that wanted to be cool and like craft beer were struggling with 100 IBU beers. But as soon as somebody started making an 8% beer that's kind of sweet but has huge hop flavor and is trendy, ooh, there's very little pushback there, and now they can be cool and drink that beer, and you know. And again, it sounds like I'm bagging on the style. I'm not. I like it too, but you know.
Well, I mean, it's a well-established thing on our podcast that the worst thing that ever happened to craft beer was the West Coast. But so I'm with you on that. But it's but you're right. I mean, it is something that's and really what you're saying is that craft beer has become more accessible. And, you know, there's less of just that in your face bitterness, and it has different flavors and everything. And that's what, and if I'm putting words in your mouth, tell me, but you know, it's more appealing to a wider audience. And I think that that's been a huge benefit to the industry.
Well, I think it's been a huge financial benefit to the industry, but I think you just hit it on the head when you said it's made it more accessible to a wider audience. Well, that makes me think about Budweiser, Miller, and Coors, you know, because, you know, what they did in the 1930s was make lagers accessible to a wider audience by removing a third of the malt and replacing it with corn or rice, you know, and that's it's. I know that's a harsh, you know, comparison, but I don't know. Like I said, it sounds like I'm bagging on those styles, and I'm not. I drink them too. I drink them all the time, but every now and then someone will be like, hey, try this beer. And I'll be like, my God, it's clear and it has a firm bitterness. Like what a revelation. Like, you know, it's
right.
We've gone too far down one path, and we're you know, there's 120 styles of beer and we're drinking 3, you know, like, come on, everybody, let's drink porters and cream ales and, you know, oatmeal stouts and, you know, whatever, you know, Kolsch's. And
can dark beers be next year? Can that be the flavor of the year?
I hope so. Yeah, I would like that.
Why not?
I'm a big fan. Stouts and porters, and I tell you, the underrated style is Scotch ales, and I praise those on this show all the time for good reason. I'm a big fan.
Me too. I love a wee heavy. And even the smaller ones, like the sessionable 3, 4, 5% Scottish ales are good.
Yeah,
I like them a lot.
Yeah,
I would have won that category in the Boss competition had it not been canceled. By the way, I sent a couple bottles to Jason for entry for Wee Heavy, and was really disappointed when it had to be canceled.
It was a solid product that George had too. I will back him up that I think that was champion quality beer.
Do you guys know about the reboot of our competition that we're doing?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's good.
I noticed the lack of Wee Heavy category though.
You and me both. I've brewed. I mean, I drink these beers. What I'm about to say, I drink these beers all the time, commercially and other people's homebrew. But I have brewed probably 2 double IPAs, maybe 3 IPAs, and maybe 3 or 4 pale ales in my whole 200 beer history of homebrew. I don't brew those because once I learned that when hobby beers get old, they're not as good. I'm like, well, I don't want to deal with the pressure of that. You know, I don't want to have, you know, 51 bottles or an entire keg of a beer that I got to drink in 3 weeks or it's not as good anymore. So I have 6 taps in my basement. I got 6 kegs in my Keyser, and with a rotation like that, I really can't go through, you know, a keg of hoppy beer before it's going south. So I never brew those beers at home. And so when they said, it's going to be an all hoppy beer competition, I was like, well, shit, you know, what am I going to do? So I'm doing a California, I'm doing a California Common, a steam beer, and I'm doing an English bitter.
Okay.
Do you have any mini kegs?
I do. I've got a 1 1/4 gallon little keg, and then I have a 2.5 gallon keg. Is that what you mean? Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
George and I both got onto the 2.5 gallon keg movement earlier this year, and George was nice enough. He gifted me with a 2.5 gallon keg just recently,
Nice.
and it really solves a problem which I think you were just starting to describe about if you have a beer you want to make, but you're nervous about how quickly you can go through it, and an IPA is a good example of that because the shelf life is definitely shorter.
Right.
That can be the answer to it. Make a smaller batch and a smaller keg, kind of solves that problem for a lot of people.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Well, that and experimental batches, like I don't want to make 5 gallons of something I don't know if I'm going to like, instead make
Yes.
1.5 gallons and stick it in that mini keg,
Yeah, during the quarantine, I was playing around with. I was in one of my. I'm kind of blessed that there's a homebrew shop that's literally 3 minutes from where I work, and that's where Paulie works. And then there's another homebrew shop in Plainfield that's like 8 minutes from my house. So I have 2 awesome homebrew shop options, very close to wherever I'm at. But I was in one of those stores 6 months ago. I don't know, and they had these little 2-gallon white fermenter buckets with a grommeted lid, and I was like, well, that's cute. I could buy like a gallon of apple juice and just play around making all kinds of funky little ciders, and so I started doing that during the quarantine. Because that's easy, and yeah, so I got the first one of those in that little 1 gallon keg I have right now.
Nice.
Yeah, and
All right. Yeah, so you're talking about the world famous Brew and Grow in Bolingbrook, Illinois, huh?
You said it. The world famous Brew and Grow in Bolingbrook, Illinois. It's worth repeating.
You betcha.
It may or may not come up on this show quite often.
I mean, every show.
I was if you ever go in that store and you're standing at the counter that's the register that's closest to the front door, and you lean back and look up and you see that shelf of all those empty bottles of beer up there. Oh
yeah, it's hard to miss.
I probably brought 2/3 of those bottles in and shared them with the original staff that worked at that store. That's I have no doubt why those people don't work for that employer anymore, because it was I don't know if I'm telling tales, because it's not like it's whatever, it's really well run and it's a great shop, but man, back in the day it was like a party in there. That was before Illinois kind of got freaked out about homebrew shops brewing and serving homebrew to the customers.
Yeah.
Now they do it again, but they give you like a little 1 ounce pour or whatever. Well, back in the day, you could just get like a beer. You could get like a 10-ounce beer to walk around the store with, and if you liked that one, you could go try a different one. And it got to the point where I'd go there after work with like a rolling cooler, and I'd have like 3 growlers of homebrew with me. And I'd be like, hey, let's open this one and try it. Hey, let's drink this one.
You would go in with 3 growlers?
Oh yeah,
that's awesome.
And like customers would be coming in and drinking with us, and then they'd leave, and the store would close at 7, and the manager was like, well, as long as everybody clocks out, I don't care if you guys stay. And then he'd leave, and there was a couple of times where it was like 10 o'clock at night when we were rolling out of there, out of the homebrew shop.
The homebrew shop. That's awesome.
But
stumbling home from the homebrew shop. Yeah.
In hindsight, that's probably no way to run a business. So, literally every single person that worked at that shop back in those days is long gone. Like they're all gone, and they all went off to do other things and whatever. I think management kind of kicked a little butt, and it was probably for the best. But
I guess the one positive that you could spin from that story with everybody involved is I guarantee they had a whole lot more repeat customers than they would have had if they hadn't have done that. Because you get people in the door, and hey, whatever it takes to make that happen. Hey, it's a lot easier to get people to buy product if they're there in the store, regardless of
True enough.
Yeah, long before they came up with the shelving configuration they have there now, it used to be when you walked in the front door, there was like some big shelves off to the left where the hops cooler is now. And I was in there one day, and that was where there was like wine kits and I wandered down that aisle because I'd never looked at that stuff before, and I was like, oh, look at this stuff. And there's this guy in that aisle, and he goes, hey, see this one? And it was like a peach wine kit. And I'm like, yeah, I see it. He goes, this is what you do. You take this home and you make it, but you add an extra pound of corn sugar to it, so it really spikes the ABV. And then you put that thing in a keg when it's done and carbonate it. Liquid panty peeler.
Liquid.
Oh my
Oh.
I was like, all right, well, you have a nice day, sir. Like,
I love it.
Can I make a t-shirt out of that? Seriously.
I think, yeah, that should be a t-shirt. Yeah.
So I was like, you're basically making a wine cooler that's, like 8% ABV, 9% ABV, because, the wine kit was supposed to make like a 6 or 7% wine, and then he's adding a pound of sugar to it on top of that. So,
oh man, that's crazy. All right.
Another crazy thing. Talking about equipment back in those days, a guy. I heard the secondhand. I wasn't there that day, but like the next day, I'm in there with my 3 growlers or whatever, and they're like, yeah, this guy came in yesterday, and he walked up to the counter and slapped like his gold card on the counter and said, "Yeah, I got permission from the wife. I want the whole setup. I want to become a home brewer."
Oh dang!
And the guy was an attorney, so he had money, and so they would say like they kind of like dipped their toe in the waters. They were like, "Well, here's a starter kit of equipment, but you're going to find yourself within a year or two wanting to upgrade." And he's like, "Well, let's just go for the upgrade right away then." And basically, this guy walked out of there like $700 lighter, and which was fine. They sold all the stuff they sold was good stuff, and they said he came in like a month and a half later and said, "Yeah, I brewed like 3 batches, and you know what? I think I'd rather just buy beer. Can I sell this stuff back to you?" And they were like, "Well, no.
Oh,
this isn't a secondhand shop. Like, no." And so he took it well. He's like, "All right, fine, I'll sell it somewhere." And they knew his name. And they said like a week or two later, all that stuff showed up on eBay for like, 50% of what he paid for it.
of course.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, that one guy like that, $700 doesn't even make a dent on his gold card, So yeah,
Right.
it was worth a shot for him,
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was like a $400 lesson.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well.
So we're coming up to the tail end here, but I do have a question I'd love to surface here. And it relates back to the brewing competitions that you've participated in for a long time. And you mentioned winning the award in 2012.
Yeah.
George and I started competing around the year of 2015, which corresponded when we first started doing all grain, and we were feeling good, confident, and we were submitting to competitions right away there.
Right.
You've seen how, since that time, the growth of craft beer has continued its upward trajectory since then.
Sure.
How has being a part of beer competitions in the early 2010s compared to the competitions 2015 and onward?
Well, it's there's fewer brewers. I mean, I think homebrewing, you know what? I think homebrewing over the last, I would say, let's just say the last 3 or 4 years is tailing off. Like people who maybe 10 years earlier would have picked up the mantle or been attracted to it are not as much, because everybody lives within 15 minutes of a brewery now. And if they don't live within 15 minutes of a brewery, they live within 5 minutes of a store where they can buy an almost embarrassingly large range of craft beers.
That's a good point. Yeah.
It is a good point.
Yeah.
So, all of my mentors and all the old guys in my club, they homebrewed out of necessity because they just couldn't get these styles. And, when you look at all the styles that, that the homebrewers might brew, those guys, or those folks, I mean, they were brewing those styles never having tasted them before. And they were trying to brew something that they just had read about, whereas now, almost anything that a person might want to find, unless it's some rare Cantillon bottle or something, it can be had somewhere without too much effort. So I don't know that people are brewing out of necessity anymore. It's just out of like why would I have ever made my own furniture? because I could go buy furniture. It's probably cheaper than buying all the tools that I bought to make my own furniture. But I wanted to make something with my hands, and I liked the process, and I liked the hobby. So that's why I still homebrew. I mean, I've got the money to go buy beer, but I do still homebrew because I like the process and all that. So what I'm seeing in competitions, in the Boss Club, if you agree to be the competition coordinator, it's a 3-year gig. So you're gonna sign on to do it, and you're gonna do it 3 years in a row. I did it in, it was like 14, 15, 16, those years, I think, or somewhere around there. And my second year, so my one innovation I brought to the table was using social media to market it. So we had always had 300 and something entries in our competition. Sometimes it would float down to close to 300, and I think maybe at its peak before I took it over, we might have got to 350 one time. You know, it was around that size of a competition. By the second year I did it, we had 530 entries because I was marketing it heavily on social media, and I was getting all the homebrew shops in Chicagoland to put up posters and whatever. And I truly believe that was like the last, I don't mean last forever, but last as in most recent, huge wave of new homebrewers was around 2015. And I think an awful lot of them, and I hate to say this, but they got attracted to enter a beer in a competition, and they got stomped. They got a 20 or something on their score, and they're like, this is stupid. I like my beer, and my family and all my friends like my beer, and they didn't have anybody to mentor them. I think maybe they weren't in clubs. I don't know, but the guys in the homebrew shop tell me the same thing, that the number of people that come in who are homebrewers is just less than it was 5 years ago. And who knows what the real reason is, but that's my sort of impression with competitions is, if a competition is maintaining its numbers, it's usually being done with fewer brewers brewing more beers each, not by more brewers getting in the mix, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
it does.
And your point about the varieties that are being available out in the marketplace makes perfect sense as well.
Yeah.
And I totally see how that could potentially discourage people from going out in your garage and making a product, as opposed to just going down the street and buying what's on the shelf.
But what's funny is that's what keeps me homebrewing, because like a month and a half ago I was like, I cannot find a Kolsch, I just cannot find any. And so I brewed one, because I can, and that's one of the things that's still lighting my fire as a homebrewer. Styles I just can't find.
I feel like this is a topic for a episode in the near future, George. What keeps you homebrewing? Not what brought you to homebrewing, but what keeps you homebrewing. That's a very interesting topic.
Yeah,
let's do that. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we are coming up on the top of the hour, guys. Do we want to wrap it up?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah.
Scott, this was fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, I was happy to do it. I'm so glad Paulie invited me, and it was great hanging out with you guys. And
thank you. Do you want to send a quick plug out to for Boss? Do you have any website and social media links you want to share?
Yeah, so the Boss Club, our website is bossbeer.org, and from that website you can see, how to become a member. You can see all about our competition. There's all those links on the site. And then on Facebook, if you just do a search in Facebook under Brewers of South Suburbia, you kind of find our public-facing page. But then, of course, if you become a member, there's a Facebook group that's just members only, so we can, whatever, say funny things that no one else can see, or whatever. And we meet the first Friday evening of every month. Well, when there's not a pandemic. That's our general thing, and every month of the year we meet in a brewery. We rotate around, except we have a club picnic every September. That's at one of the members' farms, and that's like a beer festival. We have a huge tap box. It has a 20 tap box. It's full of homebrew, and it's a great event. And then every December, every December we do a Christmas party at Rock Bottom in Orland Park, which we keep hearing is going to come back. So we don't know if it will or not. But yeah, but the other 10 months of the year, we always meet in one brewery or another that will host us. Since the pandemic's been happening, we're doing Zoom. We've made great use of the online platform Zoom, and we did what we called Boss Fridays for about 2 months in a row. We met every Friday night just to hang out and have some human interaction and drink beers. And we alternated every other week. 1 week, a home brewer would show off their system and their process, and then the next week, a pro brewer would ahead of time announce the beers, and then everyone would go out and buy those beers, and then we'd all sit there and do like a guided tasting of their beers. So,
oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, that went on for a couple of months, April, like mid-April to mid-June, and now, a lot of guys are like, I just can't do that every Friday night. So their lives are starting up again. So we're kind of pulling back from that and only doing it once or twice a month again. But we still haven't had an in-person meeting because of the pandemic. But that's kind of what the Boss Club's all about. There's around 100 members every year. Some years it's 120, some years it's 80, but it just depends. But what I like to call the Boss family, which is anybody who's been a member in the last, say, 5 years, is pretty strong. There's probably 130, 140 people. And, they fade in and out when they remember to pay their dues.
Yeah.
and there's decades of brewing experience and knowledge in that club. There's like a half a dozen breweries or meaderies in Chicagoland that were started by former Boss members or current Boss members. So it's pretty exciting.
That's awesome.
Nice.
Yeah. Well, thank you again.
Thanks,
Our
guys.
website is let's try this again. Our website is www.niceplacetobrew.com. We do our webcast every Thursday here on Facebook and our YouTube page. It's 7 p.m. Eastern Time, 6 p.m. Central Time. Our YouTube page has all of our past episodes. We've got plenty of material out there going back to the beginning of the pandemic. We have a podcast under the same name, A Nice Place to Brew. It's available on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, and wherever else you get your podcast from. Our social media links are A Nice Place to Brew and Nice Place to Brew on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And what am I forgetting, George?
I think that's it.
That's everything. Yeah.
I think that's everything. Yeah.
Well, check out our past episodes. Check out our podcast, and be back here next Thursday here on the Facebook and the YouTube at 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central. Scott, thank you so much for joining us. This was fantastic.
All right, guys. Thank you so much.
Cheers to you, man.
All right.
And as we end every show, we raise a glass and we send out one last cheers, and we say, it takes a lot of good beer to make great beer. Cheers.
Awesome.
Cheers.
Cheers.